Well, after a little bit of technical difficulty, how are you all? Um, I was looking through all of the little boxes earlier, and it's interesting because I think there may be half of the people who are here with us today. I don't know that I know you, or at least I've not met you in person. So it just shows how things have changed over the last year. It's nice to see you all here this morning. Wonderful that everyone's been able to set this time aside to sit together. These longer periods of sitting are actually very important to me. I feel they're really necessary for me to kind of deepen my practice, to really settle in and quiet my mind. I'm beginning to feel a little bit of impatience with the online format. But by the same token, it's just nice that we can all participate together without having to burn tons of fossil fuel. And of course, the world, I think I realized the world is just slowly coming out of its shell after the last year. The Village Zendo is working to figure out how we can reopen the physical Zendo while still preserving this online experience that we've all been sustained by over the last year. Enkyo Roshi once said that I believe Maizumi Roshi used to say "poco a poco," little by little, which is good advice from our Japanese Zen grandfather. As I was putting together this talk, I actually also remember Ryutan Roshi once told me that when he was putting together a Dharma talk for our group at Sing Sing, his purpose was simply to encourage them in their practice. And I actually like this motivation for a Dharma talk. It's just words of encouragement. And that's partly why I want to ask, how are you all? Just, I want to pull you aside each individually and just chat about what's going on. I was remembering that when we were younger and we used to visit Sarah's relatives in the South, they'd say, "Well, how are you?" And after you'd kind of go off and tell them a little bit about how you are, they'd say, and how's your mama? And then you tell them about your mama, and then they'd ask about your daddy, and they'd ask about your brother and your sister, and you just go through the whole litany of what was going on in your life. And it was just really sweet and kind of touching to actually have that intimacy of a relationship with people where they just wanted to know your whole life, what was going on with your life. And so I want to do that with each of you. I want to just pull you aside and tell you some silly thing that happened in the last week. Or I want to hear about what you're streaming now. Or maybe what challenges you're facing. What's the edge of your practice these days? Because it's going to be different for each and every one of us. So, some of us may be starting to sit for the first time. Some of us may be coping with health issues. Some of us may be struggling financially. I know a lot of people are at this time. Others may be healthy and financially secure and wondering why we're not satisfied with our lives, given all of that. Others may be reasonably satisfied in our lives right now. And maybe we've gotten complacent and a little lazy. It's going to be different for every one of us. Yet we're all here today, practicing the Buddha way together. That's really quite remarkable. Some of us have been practicing for decades and have taken vows to uphold the Dharma. All of us here, I think, because we've shown up, we want to know, how do I uphold the Dharma? Maybe at this moment, you're only able to ask, how do I get through this week? How do I take care of myself and my family? That's the same question. How do I uphold the Dharma? Now, if you've come here today thinking that I'll have answers for your questions, I'm sorry, you'll be very disappointed. I can give you answers, but they would be my answers. So I encourage you to stay with your particular question for as long as it takes. It might mean stay with it for your whole life. Because we come to practice looking for answers to our questions. Since this is a Zen temple, in fact, we come to our teachers looking for answers to our questions. If you're doing koan study, you'll know the feeling of being completely at sea when working on a koan. You'll know the feeling that there's something that you're missing, some secret little Zen insight that for some reason you've not been gifted with. You might find that you have insight into some koans, while with others, your insight abandons you. So this state where our insight abandons us, this state of not knowing, is very, very good training. It's actually the ground of our practice. That place where we've dropped our ideas, we've dropped our preconceptions, our egoistic search for answers. When we reach that place, we're able to be open to new insight and new understanding. We're able to be alive. So there's a koan about our search for the Dharma, for inner peace, for enlightenment, and our tendency to look outside of ourselves, to look to our teachers for answers. It's case 28 in the Mumonkan. Ryutan blows out a candle. It's a long koan. I'm just going to work with the first part of it, but it's really a collection of lovely interrelated stories. So Tokusan kept asking Ryutan about Zen far into the night. Ryutan finally said, "It's late. Why don't you just go to bed?" Tokusan made his bows and lifted the blinds to withdraw, but he was met by darkness. Turning back to Ryutan, he said, "It's pitch black outside." Ryutan lit a lantern and handed it to Tokusan. But just as Tokusan reached for it, Ryutan blew out the light. At that moment, Tokusan came to sudden realization and made a deep bow. Ryutan asked, "What have you realized?" Tokusan replied, "From now on, I will not doubt the words of the old master, who is renowned everywhere under the sun." So this is the same Tokusan of Tokusan carried his bowls, although that koan takes place late in his life, and it's actually a very, very different Tokusan. In this koan, he's a young man. The story of how he ends up at Ryutan's monastery is interesting. Actually, at this point in his life, he was an accomplished scholar of Buddhist scriptures, especially the Diamond Sutra. And actually, he vigorously objected to Zen's special transmission outside the scriptures that is not based on words or letters. He was determined to stamp Zen out. This was his mission. And one day, he was in high spirits walking along a road near the Yangtze River in a region of China where Zen was flourishing. He had his commentaries on the sutras with him, and he stopped at a tea shop run by an old woman who was well versed in the teachings of Chan. So Tokusan went up to this old woman and asked for a snack. And actually, apparently, if you read this in Chinese, there's a little bit of wordplay here, because the Chinese word for snack also means to light up the mind. So he asked for a snack, but he also asked her to light up his mind. And she asked, being an observant old woman, what he was carrying in the wicker basket on his back. And Tokusan said it was the Diamond Sutra. So the old woman quoted a portion of the sutra which says, "Past mind is unattainable. Present mind is unattainable. Future mind is unattainable. And she asked Tokusan, which mind do you intend to light up? Tokusan could not answer. So this great scholar, who intended to stamp out Zen throughout all of China, could not present a living answer to the question posed by the old woman. So you can just imagine what was going on in Tokusan's heart and mind at this point. He must have felt a great doubt arising at that moment. With all of his studies and all of his knowledge, surely he would be able to say something. But deep down, he knew that anything he said would be parroting something that he had read. It wouldn't be his own expression. And so with great humility, with his tail between his legs, we might say, he asked, is there a Zen master somewhere around here I can study with? And the old woman said, yes, of course. Old master Ryutan is just a few minutes down the road. Why don't you go see him? And in the commentary, it says that when he arrived at Ryutan's place, he was just completely defeated. So that's the backstory to this koan. So back to the case. The first line of it says, Ryutan kept asking, Tokusan kept asking Ryutan about Zen far into the night. Nyogen Senzaki has a wonderful little commentary on this. He says, beginners always think that they can attain Zen by asking questions. A student who asks a question and gets Zen as the answer is one lucky dog. The teacher answers the question by throwing a bone, but not the meat. Most of the students bite the bone. Tokusan was a hungry dog, and he tried to jump at one bone after the other. So he's there just long into the night asking Ryutan, tell me, what is Zen? How am I to uphold the Dharma? How do I live my life? You can imagine Ryutan was getting a little tired of this. It was late. So he said, it's late. Why don't you just go to bed? Have you ever had guests that don't understand the party's over and it's time to go home? Some people just don't get the message. You can draw the shades, change into your pajamas, bring them their coats, and continue talking to them as you walk them to the door. Such was Tokusan's hunger for instruction. Tokusan in this instance got the message, and he made his bows and lifted the blinds to withdraw, but he was met by darkness. Turning back to Ryutan, he said, it's pitch black outside. Tokusan was indeed stuck in the darkness. I pity him, but I've been in the same place. In today's world, we might say, imposter syndrome. It's a gnawing feeling, though, that feeling of inadequacy that we've all felt. So Ryutan lit a lantern or lit a candle and handed it to Tokusan. And this is what our teachers do time after time. They point at the moon of enlightenment. See how clear and bright. It's shining on you too. But just as Tokusan reached for it, Ryutan blew out the light. So now Tokusan is now standing outside the door in complete darkness. Ryutan didn't just blow out the light, he blew Tokusan's mind. Actually, Ryutan didn't give him a light, he thrust him into the darkness. At that, Tokusan came to a sudden realization and made a deep bow. So what did Tokusan realize in that moment? Not knowing. The futility of his constant biting at the bones that his teacher dropped in front of him. The realization that paradoxically, we're all in the darkness, but we're also all in the light. You know how when you walk from a light space, a place that's very bright, into a dark space, you can't see anything? But then after your eyes adjust, you can see again. Maybe it was a few moments before Tokusan was able to see. And then he realized. Ryutan asked, "What have you realized?" Tokusan replied, "From now on, I will not doubt the words of the old master, who is renowned everywhere under the sun." He had a new appreciation for what his teacher had been saying all along. It's like taking a drink of water from the stream and knowing for yourself that the water is cold. So our teachers do point at the moon. By their words and their actions, they try to help us understand what it means to realize our true nature and to embody the Buddha way. I think there's another very important thing our teachers do. In countless interactions, they communicate their faith in our Buddha nature. Sometimes they can be firm with us. Other times they can be very gentle. But through it all, though we ourselves are unsure of whether we are on the path or not, they let us know, you're on the path, just keep at it. So when I first started working on this talk, I thought that the message was going to be stick with it, sit more, don't be lazy, put forward your utmost effort to attain the way. And as I worked on it more and more, and I've discovered this koan, I'm not sure now that this message isn't just a bit of my own Protestant work ethic coming out. Of course, we do need great determination. We do need to sit. We do need to study the sutras. We do need to work with our teachers and be part of our sangha. In fact, Yasutani Roshi said that the three essentials of Zen practice are great faith, great doubt, and great determination. And Tokusan's many, many years of effort did contribute to his eventual realization. His practice ripened over the years until he was able to realize his true nature. His years of studying the sutras were not in vain. He also, as we could see, had tremendous doubt. Anyone as dogmatic as Tokusan was, he wanted to eradicate this school that we're part of that does not depend on words or scriptures. That person is very afraid. That person is probably very afraid. If the Zen school had something, then perhaps all of this work that Tokusan had done was not worth anything at all. He had studied so thoroughly. How could anyone expect to understand the Dharma if they weren't an expert in the scriptures? And yet, at some level, Tokusan knew he didn't get it. And I think he must also have had great faith. Faith in the Buddha, the awakened nature of all beings, which includes ourselves. He had seen glimpses of it in his teachers and in himself. Faith in the Dharma, the teachings that free us from craving and delusion, the teachings that can be found all around us. Faith in the Sangha, our fellow travelers, who we have struggled with and who sustain us. Great doubt, great faith, and great determination. So even after he was knocked off of his game by the old tea woman, Tokusan went on, unsure of himself as he was, to speak with Ryutan. But the part of this story that I find to be most encouraging is not the great effort that Tokusan expended. It's not the dog biting at the bone. I'm encouraged by Ryutan's blowing out the lantern. his trust that at that moment, Tokusan would find his way in the dark. When we start to practice, we want this thing called enlightenment that we think we're lacking. And we start on a practice journey that we believe will lead to enlightenment. But the essence of the teachings is that our effort does not make us enlightened. We discover, or we might say uncover, the Dharma simply by opening up to what has already been there from the very beginning. In Tokusan's case, his mind was filled with so many ideas. It took snuffing out the candle, utter darkness, for him to see it. Master Dogen talks about the way that we often approach practice in lines 5 and 6 of the Genja koan. Carrying the self forward to confirm the existence of myriad dharmas is delusion. The myriad dharmas advancing and confirming the existence of the self is realization. When our lives and our practice are occupied with the delusion of a fixed, separate self, we see all the world around us as separate from that self. We see enlightenment as separate from ourself. We say to ourselves, this self, I'm going to study hard, and if I study hard, I will become Buddha. This is the perspective of sentient beings. When we no longer see a separate self, in other words, when we see from the perspective of a Buddha, we are not separate from all the world around us. We are not separate from enlightenment. I and all beings simultaneously attain the way. So Dogen writes from the perspective of a Buddha when he writes about continuous practice. And I'll read a little section from Dogen's fascicle on continuous practice. On the great road of Buddha ancestors, there is always unsurpassable practice, continuous and sustained. It forms the circle of the way and is never cut off. Between aspiration, practice, enlightenment, and nirvana, there is not a moment's gap. Continuous practice is the circle of the way. This being so, continuous practice is undivided, not forced by you or others. The power of this continuous practice confirms you as well as others. It means your practice affects the entire earth and the entire sky in the 10 directions. Although not noticed by others or by yourself, it is so. Our practice affects the entire earth and the sky in the 10 directions. So bring it to a more contemporary writer, my final words of encouragement are from the poet Shel Silverstein. No teacher, preacher, parent, friend, or wise man can decide what's right for you. Just listen to the voice that speaks inside. Thank you.